the knowledge that Spiritism brings to us, and accommodate us into a better future. This way, we thank you, and so be it. So, with no further ado, we would like to pass the word to our dear friend Wendell, and welcome again. And as we said at the beginning, as usual, we would like to do is to um, take a moment at the end, right? And we ask everyone to share your messages, your comments as well, interact with us, as well as the questions that you may have. And Wendell today will be talking to us about the law of worship in daily life. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I was trying to turn on my mic here. So hello, everybody, all my friends there at SSB. Hello to you who are watching online, live, or whenever in the future and wherever you are. It's always a joy to be with all of you, even if it's remotely. But we know that as the story that Leo shared backstage, we all meet in the spiritual plane. So especially prior to a moment like this, so I can feel everybody's energy, good vibrations, and I miss you all. Well, okay, so today we'll move forward in our series of talks about the moral laws, and the topic for today is the law of worship in daily life. We will discuss about some definitions, evolution of worship through the time, and try to find out if there is any um, a good reason, a good way, a good manner to worship God according to Spiritism, and especially how to apply this to our daily lives. So as I usually do, I'm sharing my source of research here for those who want to delve a little bit more deeper into this topic. A quick update here on the moral laws that we have already gone over. We have discussed the laws of preservation, destruction, society, progress, and freedom. Today, the law of worship, and we'll be missing the laws of labor, reproduction, equality, and justice, love, and charity, which we intend to finish until the end of 2026. Okay, so what is worship? According to dictionaries, worship is the feeling of reverence and adoration for a deity. The practice of showing respect for a god or a god by saying prayers, singing with orders, etc. A ceremony for this. Spiritism, however, brings us a more profound definition of worship. On the question 649 of the Spirit's book, Kardec asks, what does worship entail? And the answer is, worship is the lifting up of the thought toward God. Through worship, the soul draws near its creator. So we notice here that according to spirits, worship is not defined by what we do with our body, right? It's not about standing, kneeling, singing, and etc. So it's defined by what we do with our thought. And by that, we can conclude that worship is not restricted to any specific place or, or time. As a mental orientation, it is possible to happen anywhere, anytime, including during our daily routine actions and tasks. And when we look at the second part of the answer, we see this expression through worship, the soul nearer to its creator. So, when we dedicate this time to worship God, But when we practice this mechanism, uh, we, be, we build this bridge, there's a spiritual bridge, let's put it that way, between us and God. When we focus on our thoughts on the divine, it's like we change our vibrational frequency to be more in tune with with the creator. So this is one of the effects of uh, worship. Am I right? So I'm sorry. Yes, question 650. Let me just see if I'm in the right. Yes, I am. Question 650. Is worship the result of an innate sentiment or the product of education? Meaning, did we need to be taught about worship? Is it something that we learn at school from our family? It's part of our culture? Or if we were not thought about it, we would still have this intuition, this awareness of the need of worshiping God? And the answer was an innate sentiment like that of the divinity. The awareness of their weakness leads humans to bow before the one who can protect it, protect them. So first of all, like that of the divinity. So when we read this, we understand that as our comprehension, our awareness of the necessity of the need of worship is to our comprehension, our intuition of the existence of God. And this is found on the reading of question number 6 of the Spirit's book. Mightn't our inner sentiment about the existence of God be the result of education and the product of acquired ideas? And the answer was, if that were the case, why would members of your primitive cultures have this intuition, right? So it's not that we needed to be taught about the existence of God. We always had this sentiment about the existence of something greater than us. Of course, that the comprehension of God has changed. We will discuss this a little bit further. But the point is, we always understood that there was something beyond, that it was not limited to the human existence. And now, question 652. Does worship has its source in natural law? It is part of natural law because it is the result of an innate sentiment in humankind. That is why we find it among all peoples, albeit expressed in different forms. So, in its very wider sense, worship was not invented by Spiritism, by Christianism, or by any other doctrine. It is something that has always existed among different peoples and in different times, right? Primitive people used to worship God, worship vengeful gods, warrior gods, gods who needed pleasing, ferocious animals, and phenomena of nature, and etc. But we need to understand that although worship does not need to be taught, that's something innate, the way we express worship, it indeed can be influenced by some cultural traits of some people in some different times, some different era of civilization. We're going to see further that the way we worship now is different from the way we used to worship before. Uh, okay, I think I have the impression that I missed some slide here. Allow me to. No, fine. Yeah, okay. No, it's just something that I had to comment on this question. I'm sorry, I have to go back to question 650 because I comment the part of the awareness of the divinity, but I didn't go further on this second part. So let's discuss the second part here. The awareness of their weakness leads humans to bow before the one who can protect them. That's what I want to discuss here. Why is it important, to say the least, to worship God? Is it important to whom? To God? Does God need to be praised? Does God need to be appreciated. Does God need to be encouraged by what we say to Him? Like us, when, for instance, when it's our birthday. I don't know about you guys, but I love when it's my birthday because my all my friends and my family members keep saying that I'm this and that, and I end up believing, at least for one day, that I am this and that. Or when your boss and your supervisor comes to you and say, "You did a great job, well done," and you feel encouraged by it. So that's, can we say that the same happened to God, that God needs to feel appreciated, that God needs to feel encouraged by us? Of course not, right? Because if if God were to need anything from us, God would not be God, right? If God would need to be encouraged, complimented, appreciated, it wouldn't be God, because this would contradict one of the very attributes of God, among which is being all powerful, right? So uh, we need to have in mind that when we worship God, it's not because of God, it's because of us, because of our own needs. Because when we acknowledge God's attributes, we entrust ourselves to God, and then we feel protected and relieved, and we feel more resigned and better when facing the struggles of life, right? So, worship, when we worship God not for God, but for ourselves because of our needs. Okay, this is important. I could not have missed it. So let's go back to. Okay, so we have to have in mind as well that, as I said, our comprehension, the comprehension of God among primitive peoples was not the same as ours right now, right? For primitive people, the meaning of God was very broad. It was a generic qualification given to every being existing outside human conditions. So everything that represented a power greater than that of the human being was worshipped by a god. So we can summarize the worship among primitive peoples as men attempting to understand spiritual phenomena through their own human experience, right? Uh, trying to give human form to natural elements in order to bring to understand a little bit these spiritual phenomena that happen and nobody could understand what it was. So primitive people also used to worship things like stones through litholatry, plants through phytolatry, animals through animal zoolatry, and supernatural entities through mythology. Okay, let's move forward. So, evolution of worship. Worship has evolved along the evolutionary process of human being, right? By improving oneself intellectually and morally, man also improves his conception of God and his way of worshiping God. So, if you think about our comprehension of God right now, uh, we cannot compare it to what it was when we used to be primitive people. Although we don't have a complete comprehension about God, and I believe that we will never have, because regardless of how evolved or how perfect and how pure and angel we are as spirits, there will always be something that we will not have available, we will not be able to trespass. Because if we could comprehend God in his whole essence, God would not be God. Because God is absolute, God is all powerful, God is unique. So there will always be something that no spirits can penetrate regarding the comprehension of God's essence. But we cannot deny that we have evolved regarding our comprehension of God, especially after the teachings of Spiritism that brought us the attributes of God, right? The first question of the Spirit's book is, what is God? So by having a better comprehension of God, of course, that the purpose of our worship changes, and also the ways that we use to worship God. Moving forward on question 653. Does worship require outward expression? Kardec asked to the spirits, and the answer was true worship comes from the heart. In all your actions, always remember that the Lord is watching you, right? So, if, as we saw, worship is the acknowledgement of our weakness, the acknowledgement of God's greatness and God's abilities to protect us. So this awareness should be internal, should be intimate. So it's not others that we must convince that God is great. It's ourselves. So uh, worship should be more an inward and internal expression than an outward uh, and external expression. But then Kardec goes further in the same question. Are outward worship forms useful nonetheless? And the spirits answer, yes, if they are not a vain pretense, they are if they are not a vain pretense. They are always useful for setting a good example. But those who practice such forms of worship only out of affectation and vanity, belie in their appearance of pity, set a bad example rather than a good one. And they do more harm than they can imagine. So, in other words, an outward expression of worship can be useful as long as it's not just pretending and act a lie. And more important, if we make it clear that behind the external expression there is an intimate intention and feeling, right? Because we need to separate these two concepts. Worship will always be inward, intimate, but the expression of worship can be, as the question says, uh, outward. So we need to separate these two concepts. And that's why in the Gospel of Luke, we find these teachings from Jesus when he talks about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Jesus says, two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then Jesus concludes, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So we can see that the prayer said by the Pharisees uh, was basically based on formality, on ritual, and worstly on bragging for being this and that, right? And when we look at the prayer said by the tax collector, it was characterized by sincerity, humility, and heartfelt devotion. So at the end of the day, it's not what we say or show to others that counts, but what we feel, and more especially what we do that counts to God. The law of worship and prayer. Is there any connection and relation between these two concepts, worship and prayer? Of course there is, because prayer is a concrete way to practice worship. If we look at the question 659, Kardec asked, what is the general character of prayer? And the answer was, prayer is an act of worship. Praying to God is thinking of God, drawing nearer to God, putting oneself in communication with God. Let's pause here. So if we look at this definition of prayer here, and we go back to the definition of worship that we saw in the beginning, it is the same, right? Worship, lifting up our thought to God. Here, prayer, thinking of God, same thing. And drawing near to God. There it says that a soul draws it to its creator. Who is our creator? It's God. So it's the same concept. So prayer is a concrete or maybe more effective way to worship God, our creator, uh, however we want to call it. And it goes further. Through prayer, we may do three things: praise, ask, and thank. So, by praising, we acknowledge God's greatness, entrust ourselves to Him, and thus feel comforted and at peace amid the vicissitudes of life. So, when we speak of praising, we must remember that God does not need to be complimented, right? So, instead, praise is for our own benefit, because by acknowledging a power and a wisdom greater than our own, we gain healthy sense of proportion, right? It helps us realize that although our problems feel enormous and giant, they are in comparison with the size, the great design of the universe, they are small, right? So then we we take ourselves off the center of the universe and we wait a minute. There's something that's is taking care of that, so it's not that bad. Uh, Asking in prayer is an expression of faith, humility, and trust, designed to deepen a relationship with God. Designed to deepen a relation with God rather than inform God of needs God already knows. Right? So when we ask to God, we don't have to. We know that we must know that God knows what we need, but we can ask. The point is, Jesus encouraged us to ask, right? If you look at the chapter 27 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, ask and you shall receive. It is an encouragement by Jesus that we should ask. The point is, sometimes, or most of the times, what we ask is not exactly what we need and not exactly what is good to us. And sometimes it can even hinders our process of growth, spiritual growth, right? So we are allowed to ask whatever we want, whatever we think it's important to us. But we need to expect that God will only grant us what is important to us, what is good to us, and most importantly, what is convenient to our spiritual revolution. And thank. We should give thanks for the experience, for the good experience, as well as for the evil that has not yet come. And especially when it does occur, we should do the same, recognizing that only what is necessary for spiritual growth takes place in accordance with the law of cause and effect. This is an expression of the book Psicologia da Gratidão, in English, Psychology of Gratitude, by Joana de Angelis. So Joana de Angelis teaches us that gratitude is a sign, is a state, is a proof of psychological maturity. And I really like this expression, psychological maturity, because it's not age that guarantees psychological maturity to us, right? We can age and not not gain any maturity, any psychological maturity. So when we practice thankfulness in all circumstances, the good and the one that we consider bad, we we move away from the victim mindset, right? We stop asking, why is it happening to me? And we start asking, what is it teaching me? What do I need to learn from that? Right? So that's so important that we recognize that not only the good situations, the good circumstances are a part of our day by day. So we live in a world of trials and expiations, And we will have to deal with struggles. We have to deal with vicissitudes, with problems, right? So, and these are part of our evolutionary process, right? We are still not ready to evolve only through love. We need to evolve through work, and especially by suffering as well, because we have debts, right? And we have to be in peace with our consciousness. So we have to thank not only the good things, but the bad things that haven't happened yet, and even the bad things that have already happened. Because if we believe, if we trust that God is watching us, is taking care of us, so there's nothing to fear and there's nothing wrong. I There's something that I used to think during pandemic. Sometimes I saw myself thinking, what's happening to God right now? That all of this happening, so many people dying. And I thought, you know, God is not losing control over anything, because God is all powerful. And second, God will not cross God his or her arms and say, I don't care, they deserve it, so I won't do anything. Of course, God was watching that, and of course, maybe there was a purpose for that, but that's something else to discuss in maybe another talk. Okay, and how does prayer works? What are the mechanisms of prayer? In the book Spiritismo Passo a Passo com Kardec, or in English, Spiritism Step by Step with Kardec, Cristiano Torchi says that prayer is one of the greatest forces in the universe. Our prayer reaches God through thought and will, which act upon the universal fluid, propagating in waves faster than the speed of light. The mind acts as a receiver and a transmitter of magnetic waves. Therefore, there is no distance for prayer. So, we need to remind, that we are all immersed in the universal fluid. Let's imagine that this light blue part here is the universe, and it's the universal fluid. So the universal fluid fills the space and encompasses everything, all beings, both incarnate and discarnate. Right? So when we say a prayer, we emit our feelings through our thought and our will. These feelings in form of fluids act upon the universal fluid, which carries our intention, and the universal fluid works as the vehicle of our thought, just as the air works as the vehicle of the sound, with the difference that the vibrations of the air are limited, while those of the universal fluid extends to infinite, as they have no limit. So these higher spirits, or the spirits of mentors, or God, or Jesus, or whoever you pray to, uh, they receive the vibration of our intention, and then the connection is established, right? That's it, more or less how the mechanisms of prayer works. This is something that's not very simple for me to understand. I'm not very into physics, but for those who are more familiar, maybe it sounds more simple and more okay to understand. But that's how it works, and the effects of the benefits of prayers we will discuss further in the next slides. So, is there a right way or a best way to prayer to worship God? That's what Kardec asked to the spirits on question 654 of the Spirits book. Does God have any preference for those who worship in this or or that manner? And they answer, God prefers those who sincerely worship from the bottom of the heart, doing good and avoiding evil, to those who think they honor God through ceremonies that do not render them any better than their neighbor. And I gather here some images of different ways of prayer, like holding a sacred object like a rosary or a Bible uh, on one's knees, with eyes closed, with eyes open, alone, in group, or facing some direction, like the Muslim that pray facing the sacred seat of Mecca. And the answer is that it doesn't make any difference, right? At the end of the day, the material or the external expression, the form that we use to worship God, to pray, makes no difference. What really matters is how sincere and heartfelt the prayer is. And here I'd like to ask you something. Have has any one of you ever experienced saying a prayer in a very, very hard moment of your life, like suffering um, with anguish and pain and moral pain, spiritual pain, asking for, begging for an answer, a change, a signal, with tears coming out of your eyes, and then when you talk to God and you share with God all your feelings, right after that, you could feel a very subtle change of vibration, a very subtle change on the fluids of your perispirit that reflect on your body and on your mind. And that's what I think, that's me personally, that's what I think that happened to André Luiz from the book Nosso Lar, or Our Home, when he was on his last moments in the inferior zones, in the umbral, and he was exhausted, questioned himself why he was considered a suicider, because he would never, that for him, that's something that he would never think of doing, because he used to like life, right? And even so, he was suffering that way. And then when he was not anymore bearing with that situation, he surrendered himself to the belief that there must be something. And then he call out for help, for God, and the help comes and he is rescued, right? So sometimes we need to be exhausted to really feel to really be able to express our intentions to God or to the high spirits, right? And then we can feel the immediate effects of a prayer. But thank God, it's not every day or every time that we are facing such situations, right? So I'm not trying to say that these are the only conditions that are able to make us say a prayer that it is really efficient toward God or the spirituality. Uh, and then we think of the instructions that Jesus gave to his disciples, and we can find the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 5 to 8. Jesus said, "And when you pray, do not be like hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him." So we need to discuss about three expressions here, right? Because we need to remember that Jesus used to speak to us through parables and through metaphors. And when we think of that time, we know that not many houses have different rooms inside it. Most of them were an empty space with people inside. At least this some information that we gather from literature. So what did Jesus mean when he said, "Go into your room"? If we say a prayer outside of a room, it's not effective. Our room is the only place that where we can say an effective prayer. If we don't close the door of our room, we are not saying a prayer in the right way. So, of course, that's not what Jesus said or Jesus meant. So, we need to pay attention in these three expressions. So, go into your room, access, look, visit the depths of your conscience, right? Examine your feelings. What is disturbing you or what is making you happy? What are the reasons for you to ask, to request? What are the reasons for you to be thankful for? What is your comprehension of God that makes you praise God, right? So you need to feel, to really feel what you are sharing during your prayer. It's something that you have to look inside, right? We cannot be on the surface of ourselves during a prayer. We need to be within our conscience. Close the door. Temporarily forget about the exterior. Focus on what is within yourself, your feelings, intentions, and thoughts. So, what does it mean, close the door? Deny access to exterior inputs and stimulus, right? That's what Jesus meant when he, during the cure of the daughter of Jairus, he said to Jairus, come inside the door, move away from the people. The people meant, meaning the noisy, the ideas, the confusion in his mind that were preventing him to have a better environment for receiving that miracle that was about to happen to her daughter, right? The same thing that Jesus said to Simon during the very first meeting when Jesus told Simon to move away from the beach with his boat, right? The beach meaning also the people talking and interfering in the psychosphere, but also the beach meaning the material aspect, the material things, right? Sometimes during the prayer, we need to close the door, especially nowadays with so many different inputs that we have around us, right? So close the door of our mind and our our heart and our body. And then the third part, and pray to your Father. There should be a moment of you thinking of God, drawing nearer to God, putting yourself in communication with God. So it's you and God, no intermediates, no other people participating. And when I say no intermediates, I don't want to mean that we have to pray specifically to God. It's not that. Of course, there are people that prefers to pray to saints, pray to their spiritual guardian, to the angel of God, to the superior spirits. I tend to pray to Jesus. But at the end of the day, you need to have in mind that whoever you pray to, God can hear your praise. Because there are two attributes of God that we must know. God is omniscient and omnipresent. So there's nothing that God cannot know, nothing that God cannot access, right? So, and what are the good qualities, the qualities of a good prayer, right? If we could uh, gather 5 tips of a good prayer, what would be on the list? I would say sincerity, first of all, right? Because the intention of the heart is much more important than the repetition of said formulas that you say. And also because God can see into the depths of our soul. So, as I said, God is omniscient, omnipresent. So, I cannot dissimulate to God, right? God knows me entirely. I cannot pretend to Him. So, I must be sincere in what I'm feeling and in what I'm saying. Humility is the next. So, it means praying with the attitude of the tax collector, right? Like acknowledging our faults, acknowledging that I'm not perfect at all, right? Rather than with the attitude of the Pharisee, right? With pride and bragging to be this and that, and only worried about uh, the form and the ritual, right? Forgiveness. This is very good. This is the pain in the neck. Because have we forgiven everybody that we have something, that we hold something with? Now I remember the talk that we had with Leo in the end of 2024, right? Yes. Yes, in the end of 2024 about forgiveness. So I invite you to look for this talk online. It was really interesting. So it is essential that before we we say a prayer, we try to forgive those against whom we hold something, because this will purify our heart and will make a better environment, better conditions for us to emit and receive the vibrations of the prayer. So when we don't forgive, it's like we create a barrier between us and God or the high spirits. The next one is trust or faith, right? We must know that, as I said, we are able to ask wherever we want, but we must understand that God will only grant us what is good to us and what is important to our evolution, right? And this is faith. This means faith. When we trust and accept God's wills to our life, God's will to our life, this is having faith. God, I may not understand right now why this is good to me, but God knows, and no one knows better than God, right? So this is trust, this is faith. We may ask, but whatever God sends to me, I must know that that is the better for me now. And clarity and simplicity. So we should try to avoid elaborate and flawless speech, words, and useless repetition, right? Our praise should be sincere and to the point. Because unless this elaborate, flower, difficult speech is part of our style in our day by day, our prayer will sound affected, false, fake, and it may interfere, it may impair the process of connection between us and the high spirits. And what are the benefits of a quality prayer? What can we get when we say a quality prayer? The first one is communication or connection with the higher realms, right? And this is something that we search when we are praying. We ask for orientation, we ask for answers, we ask for advice, right? Have you ever gone to bed with some important decisions to make, some answers to look for, and everything looks so complicated and difficult, and then you said a prayer, and when you woke up the next day, everything seemed more clear, more simple, and you had the answer you were looking for, right? Support and courage. When we pray, we find the support. There's resignation to go through the trials of life, and we have to understand that we need these trials, right? We cannot pray to avoid these trials. God, please avoid me to go through such situation, even knowing that this is important to me. No, but when we pray, we feel stronger to bear the situations, to go through it. Spiritual cleansing, right? A good prayer can also better the vibrations of the environment, bring in spiritual harmony, which can make us feel better. So it's like an essential oil in a diffuser, only that for free and more efficient. Therapeutic action. We must understand that some of our disease, some of the causes of our pains are generated in our spirit. So by praying, we can find some relief, some remedy for these spiritual and moral pains, but also for the physical, the bodily pains, the pains the hurt that we feel in our physical body, because they are generated in the spirit. And personal transformation. Uh, Sorry. So when we pray sincerely, it helps us promote our moral improvement, right? With perseverance in doing good and trying to avoid wrongdoing. So we must remember of what Jesus said, what Jesus told to the apostles in the gardens of Gethsemane, some moments before going to persecution and crucifixion, etc. He said that watch and pray so that you will not enter into temptation, because the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So when we keep praying, when we make pray part of our daily routine, we manage to gather the force, the strength to avoid the temptations of something that is natural to our actual condition, right? Uh, yes, that's right. Okay, so moving to the end, although we have said that an spontaneous or a heartfelt uh, prayer is more efficient than some repetition of formulas, there is one pre-written and memorized prayer that is known as the most perfect expression of worship, which is the Lord's Prayer. Everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. I think we all know since we were taught since we were a child. Of all prayers, this is the one they place the highest, whether because it has come from Jesus himself, according to Matthew 6, 9 through 13, or because it can replace all others. In fact, in its highly concise form, it sums up all the duties of humans toward God, themselves, and their neighbor. It entails a profession of faith, an act of worship and submission, a request for life's necessities, and the principle of charity. So, as noted here, the Lord's Prayer is not just a petition, right? It's an act of submission of the divine will and a roadmap for moral development, for moral growth. So whenever you don't feel inspired enough to say a prayer just coming out of your heart, you can say the Lord's Prayer. As long as you put sentiment, sincerity, truth, and humility in the words you are repeating, right? So that would be the best way to talk to God, to connect with God, and to worship God. Okay, but as I said, a prayer to be efficient, we must recognize that there are some requirements, right? Like not only we need to act in accordance to what we are saying in our prayer. So, and the same happens to the Lord's Prayer. So these statements here are from Chico Xavier. They are, as far as I know, they are not in any specific book. I think it's some isolated text that he wrote with Emmanuel, and it's called a meditative Lord's Prayer. And it says, if, sorry, sometimes I lost here. Okay. If in my life I do not act as a child of God, it will be useless to say Our Father. If my values are represented by the goods of the earth, it will be useless to say, Who art in heaven. If I think of being a Christian only out of fear, superstition, or convenience, it will be useless to say, Hallowed be thy name. If I find life here so seductive, full of excess and frivolity, it would be useless to say, Thy kingdom come. If deep down what I really want is for all my desires to be fulfilled, it would be useless to say, Thy will be done. Thy will be done. If I reduce life to this bodily experience, forgetting our spiritual essence, it would be useless to say, on earth as in heaven. If I prefer to accumulate wealth, disregarding my brothers and sisters who go hungry, it would be useless to say, Give us this day our daily bread. If I do not care about hurting, insulting, oppressing, or wounding those who cross my path, it would be useless to say, Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. If I always choose the easiest path, which is not always the path of Christ, it would be useless to say, and lead us not into temptation. If by my own will I seek material pleasures and everything that is forbidden attracts me, it would be useless to say, deliver us from evil. And if knowing that I am like this, I continue to remain passive and do nothing to change myself, it would be useless to say, Amen. A meditative Lord's Prayer by Chico Xavier. So, my friends, with that said, I invite all of us to reflect on the way we have been worshiping God to ensure that we are taking advantage the best and more right advantage of this very healthy practice in our daily lives. And with this image from 2 weeks ago, when Winter said, I'll be going, but you will remember me. I thank you all and say that I'm anxious for our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendell, for this amazing teaching and reminder as well that you brought us. It's always any of the laws. I mean, it's always great to study and to remember. One thing that I add as well is that it enhances our relationship also with the Creator. Right, when we go back to the law of worship, understand what God is, and connect on a higher note. So thank you for the reminder of the prayer as well as the Lord's Prayer. So we would like to open up, not only for those on the web, but for those here as well, who would like to ask a question, make a comment. The only thing is that I will challenge you to come over here and show yourself to Wendell. Ask your question behind the computer, right? Because of the way we have the setup today. It's okay. Nothing's gonna happen to you. You're just gonna be on camera, right? But we would like to open up. If not, I'll ask a question.
We
Okay,
only
Albert,
make screenshots.
please.
Hi, Wendell. Thank you so very much. What a fantastic presentation. It was like you were doing surgery to the love of workshop and worship. And when you went down, yes. So thank you. A lot of food for thought. I I have a question though, and I'm not sure if you can answer. If not, it's okay. But in the research that you did, when you found that worshiping God is something that is innate to the spirit, and the uh, concept or intuition of God is innate to the spirit, right? So, in some of our mediumistic meetings, we have received some spirits that they spend a lot of time suffering already discarnate, different places, because they were lots, literally. I remember the case of a young lady who discarnated. She was receiving counseling in our mediumistic meeting, and she said, I didn't know all these things. I didn't know about God. I never received any spiritual or, yes, spiritual education. So with that testimony of this spirit who discarnate, and the idea of God and worshiping is something innate, it must be something that is disconnected there. So did you see something like that, or you can direct us to some material to read about it? Thank you. Big hug.
Thank you, Alba. So good to see you. Thank you for your question. Well, I haven't seen anything in my research to this talk specifically, but what we can say is that all the intuition and awareness that we have since we were created by God, it was graved by God in our intimate, it has to be developed, right? And sometimes it takes several reincarnations to be developed, and so we can, like for now, us, we had the privilege to be introduced to Spiritism, and Spiritism makes sense to us, right? So maybe we were introduced one incarnation before, and it didn't make sense, right? So now we found the right conditions to develop what has been already craved in our intimate by God when God created us. So when we say that this awareness is innate, it's because it happened, it always happened, right? Even when there was no education, even when there was no instruction, even when there was no communication. And primitive peoples already worship God. Maybe because of fear, maybe because of respect, maybe because of some intention of this unknown power, strength, do something to their plantations, to to their needs. That's why I said that now the purpose for us to worship are different, and also the ways we used to worship. So everything is graved by God in our conscience since we were created by God, but it has to be developed. And we must understand that sometimes we let's consider that we are now spirits, but maybe we will come back in different circumstances. And this uh, knowledge about spiritism and all the principles that we studied through spiritism, we'll have to go to sleep again in a future incarnation. I don't know. And when we go back to the spiritual plane, it doesn't mean that when we woke up there, we wake up there, it's all back in our mind. We have some time. During my time with mediumship meetings, we faced some spirits that were related to the First World War or the Second World War, and they were still dealing with their situations, right? So it's not because we discarnated, we are back to the spiritual plane. And I'm not saying this to you because you know, but I'm saying in a more generic way. Uh, uh, it's not because we wake up there, then everything came back to our our memory, right? So I think we need to be immersed in the propitious, in the proper conditions uh, to develop everything that was craved by God in our conscience. And God has no God is not there's no rush about it. It's rush there's rush for us because the sooner we evolve, the better. But for God, God is not expecting us to come on, chop, chop. I need you to evolve. I need you to remember what I told you, what I graved in your conscience. So that's what I understand for everything that I have already studied, but not for this talk specifically. I hope I have helped with your question.
Paula, all right. Come on now.
You exposed me to electronics. Hey, I love the talk. I especially love the evolutionary nature of worship and prayer. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm half there. It's okay. You can take it. It's like being a Gemini. um, what I'm thinking is, as prayer is evolving, wouldn't it be natural? Say we use those 3 steps of yours related to going into your room that you go inside, you take a personal inventory, and you connect with God. Wouldn't that be the perfect introduction to meditation? Because it seems to me that I love prayer, but I also love meditation. And if I'm only praying, which means thinking all the time, I'm not creating the space to hear from God or my higher self. Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you, Miss Paula. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Well, I think that we must think of our purposes praying, right? Maybe you are achieving these purposes through meditation, and it's great because, as I said, we don't pray for benefit of God. We pray or we worship for our own benefit. So, regardless the way we do it, if it's inward, if it's outward, if it's with your body, if we are reaching, if we are achieving this purpose, I think that's the most important, right? I think that meditation is great because we are living an era that everything is so fast and everything is so automatic, and we don't even have the chance to elaborate things, elaborate facts, elaborate feelings, sentiments, right? If we finish this talk and we go back home and we don't reflect about it, what we have discussed here, me about my experience with being with you guys, we've seen you, we have talked about that with you. If I don't reflect this, I am losing a great opportunity to self-knowledge, to see how life is affecting me and how I am interacting with life. So I think that this is part of praying as well. That's why go to our room is so important during prayer, right? And I think that there's no way to meditate without going to our room, right? So I think that's the way, that's the key. If we are achieving the purpose, the objectives of praying through meditation, it's okay because we need to understand that prayer is for our own benefit. God doesn't need us to pray for God, for him or for her, right? God doesn't need to be praised, um, complimented, encouraged, appreciated. No, we do it because we need to understand that there is a supreme being taking care of us, a super powerful being that is taking care of their sons and their children, right? So I think that meditation is also a good way to do it, and we must understand that if I can share this with you, it's very personal. I think that the only moment that we do that very heartfelt prayer here is once a week during the gospel at home, right? Because if we keep saying the prayer just because we woke up or because we are going to bed, it turns in something very mechanical, right? So I think that bringing pray into daily life, as was the purpose as well of this talk, I think that we say a prayer when we admire the nature and you said, God is perfect. Look at what God is able to do. Like that picture that I put on the end of my slides with the deer on my backyard in the middle of the snow. That's beautiful, really cold, but beautiful, right? So when we appreciate, when we look at, when we face some bad circumstance and we say, God, I know that you are taking care of this. This is also a good way of praying, right? So there's no set formula, there's no right formula. Um, Praying is expressing our feelings to God. So, and as long as you can, as you are achieving these purposes through meditation, I think it's great.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Wendell. I'm still muted, Daniel.
No, that's okay.
Oh, you're good? Okay. Um, Anyone else on the web at all? Sure, yes. Daniel, anyone on the web too?
No,
Okay.
just a quick question. Hey, Wendell, really great presentation with a lot of quality of prayer, like clarity, simplicity, everything. I have just a simple question. Is there any best day during the day or best time during the day to pray? Because there are some religions, let's say during the morning is the best time because the psychosphere is still a little bit like less noise, less people thinking during the morning. Based on your understanding or research, do you have any information about that? That's all. Thank you. Thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you so very much. Good to see you. Well, I think that the best day, the best time of day is the time that we can put all those three conditions together, right? It seems to me that maybe in the beginning of the morning is the easiest time to close the door, you know, thinking of go into your room, close the door and talk to your father. I think that maybe for you or for most of the people, the beginning of the morning is the best time to close the door, right? For some other people, it will happen in a different time of the day. So what we must take into consideration is that at the end of the day, it depends on each one, right? Each one's condition and circumstances. Maybe the beginning of the day is a terrible time for someone because there's children preparing to go to school and everything, or maybe going to bed is the bad time and could be the good time. So I think that the best time is when you are able to put all those three steps together. Go to your room, close the door, and talk to your father.
Daniel, should we bring the one from the web? Abby says, "Thank you, Wendell. Gave me a lot to think about. Great talk." Perfect. Yeah, it is a quite a bit to think about it, right? I also have a more. It is a question. You know, in this study of as of the Spirit's book, and we're also studying. We just started on our study on Thursdays of the Spirit's book, the natural laws, right? And we find a great if I can, and these are my words, a great void, right, of between us and understanding the creation, the creator, right? In the way we perceive God as well, right? The way we connect with God is so mundane, right? So with your study or dive into this idea, what would it be, your recommendations, if any? I know that it can become something personal as well, in order for us to get closer to God and to dehumanize, um, to say in better ways, right? The the idea that we have of God, so that this connection is more straight.
Thank you, Leo, for your question. Okay, thank you for your question, Leo. Well, that made me think about a little bit your question because, for some people, maybe humanizing God in a sense is the best way to go closer to God. It's what happens to between us and Jesus. As I said, I tend to pray to Jesus, and I used to talk to Jesus like he's my brother and he's with me, right? Of course, with much more respect than I have to my brother. but, but but for some people, imagine God in a way, in a human way, maybe is the best way to keep closer to God. But I think that we must have in mind that we don't need any more signs, symbols to think of God, right? The knowledge meant from the Spiritism has showed us that God is something that is out of our comprehension, right? But we know what we know so far is, if not enough, it's very important for our dealing with God. When we look at the first question of the Spirit's book and we see that God is the supreme intelligence of the world and the primary cause of everything, right? It brings us a very good comprehension. So we don't need to imagine God as a very vengeful being or ferocious being like that, want to revenge with us, that want to punish us. And I think that the idea that Jesus brought of God, that God is love, that love is unconditional love, is merciful being, that is great. So maybe people has different ways to consider God, and these different ways will help them in different ways to worship God, right? So I think we can keep our comprehension of God, And we must think that even more those who don't have the same comprehension of God as we have, maybe they are able to worship God as well and to achieve the purpose, the benefits of worshiping, right? So I think at the end of the day, it depends on each one, right? So for some people, humanizing God in a certain way, thinking that God is that old man with beard and is a way to keep God close to them. I don't know.
Thank you, Wendell. Anyone else would like to ask a question, comment? Okay. Wendell, thank you so much again for this amazing moment. It is as Abby mentioned to us, right? It's a lot for us to think about and try to put into practice, as you mentioned, because at the end of the day, listening to this, reminding ourselves of all of this, studying, right, and we don't put into practice is definitely um, not good for us. And personally, that's a personal thing, right? Especially the capability that we are reminded again through Spiritism that we have that no one ought to do for us but us ourselves, um, to stop and connect with God. So we're very thankful for this beautiful reminder as we almost are about to start a new month, a new beginning for all of us. We don't envy you at all with what happened to you 2 weeks ago with all that snow. Beautiful pictures. Thanks for sharing, but keep it over that way. But hopefully, some warmer weather will come your way, and you'll be able to go outside and see deers in a different scenario, right? But what we would like to do, as for closing, is to ask you to say our final prayer. Enlighten us with your final prayer, so we can bid ourselves farewell. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, my dear friends, with all that in mind, let's go inside the deepest of our room, the room of our conscience. Let's close the door for all the exterior stimulus and inputs that we may hear. And let's think of God, our Creator, this strength and power and kindness and love that we are not even able to comprehend in total, but we have no doubt that exists and that is taking care of each one of us, their creatures. Let's recognize through praising all God's greatness, all capability of creation and maintenance. And let's be grateful for existing, for have been created by God, and for being an immortal spirit with so many possibilities ahead, with the fatality already set in our existence, which is the fatality of perfection and then happiness. Even knowing that the way depends on us. How fast we are going there depends on our decisions. But we know as well, and this is also a reason to be grateful, that we are not alone. That God is so good that He or her designated some of their children to be by our sides and help us to fight the challenges, to help us identify the inferior characters, the inferior traits of our personalities, fight with them, and replace them with the virtues that were also graved by God in our consciousness. And then let's request as well, since Jesus told us to ask and we shall be attended. Let's ask God to never forget that everything is in the right place, to never forget that God has the control of everything, to never forget that there's no such force or power equal to God. And because of that, every evil is temporary. And because of that, love will always win. In the end, love will win. If we are still facing something that is not love, that's because we are not in the end yet. And with that, God, we give our needs, our concerns, our victories. We put everything in your hands because we recognize that as our Creator, you are unconditional love, mercy, and justice. Thank you once again for the opportunity to be gathered here under the name of Jesus. And help us to elaborate a little bit more all this information and try to put it in practice in our daily lives. God be with us, and so be it.